What's going on, everybody? This is Josh McCarty from Built in Buffalo and the Bills Chat podcast. And today I want to talk about Al Holcomb, the Bills' new senior defensive assistant, and what it might mean for the Bills going forward. I saw a bunch of reaction on Twitter, which was a little predictable. Of course, when Al Holcomb comes from the Carolina Panthers, he was the interim defensive coordinator last year under Steve Wilkes with, oh my gosh, the Bills are going back to the Carolina well. And look, I get it. I understand. But I think we have to also understand that while it's become kind of a meme when Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane go to Carolina and they come back with Kelvin Benjamin and they come back with Star Latulele and they come back with Josh Norman, but it hasn't always been misses. That if you want to get technical about it, DaQuan Jones was on Carolina prior to coming to Buffalo, even though he never played under Sean McDermott. They got Leonard Johnson, a really solid nickelback for them in 2017 from Carolina. So I don't think we should just immediately flinch every time we see the Carolina pipeline. You like how I flinched for you just to give you what it looks like, an example of that. I also will say, I think we probably all need to get to a mindset where we're accepting that Leslie Frazier and Ken Dorsey are coming back. And that will help us process what's going on the rest of this offseason. I was like a lot of you. I thought the Bills could have benefited from moving on from Leslie Frazier and getting a fresh set of eyes on this defense. While obviously we're not going to talk about firing Sean McDermott, the way these seasons have ended, I thought getting a new set of eyes in there, whether it's Vic Fangio or Steve Wilkes, somebody to come in, shake it up a little bit, but not throw the baby out with the bathwater and get rid of McDermott, obviously. But that didn't happen. And I think when you look at the Bills' track record under McDermott, he's fired two coordinators in his time as Buffalo Bills head coach. His first year, it was Rick Dennison. He fired him within a week of the season ending. Next year, 2018, fired Danny Crosman within a week of the season ending. So we are now outside of 2 weeks of the season ending and still no news on Frazier and Dorsey. So I think no news means they are moving forward with these guys. Steve Wilkes is off the market. Vic Fangio is off the market. So I think this is the normal we have to accept for the Bills is they're running it back with their coordinators. If you get yourself in a spot where you're accepting that, then I think we can look at this Al Holcomb news through a little bit different lens. I want to give Matt Perino from New York Upstate some credit here because he was tweeting a lot about this hire, and it got me thinking. One thing he mentioned was there was an article in The Athletic where Luke Kuechly, who did spend some time in Bill's training camp in 2021 as like, I don't know if you want to call him a coaching intern, but he was there, but he wasn't officially on the Bills staff. And they had asked him like, hey, would you ever consider becoming a full-time NFL coach? And the thing he said was, I would if Al Holcomb was the coach I worked for. So he's at least respected enough that Luke Kuechly thinks that highly of him. The other thing that I find very interesting, I went back and looked. The Bills under Sean McDermott have never had a senior defensive assistant 2018, 19, 20, or 21. Last year, the first year they ever had a defensive assistant, a senior defensive assistant, was Eric Washington. He had a co-title, defensive line coach and senior defensive assistant. That's important. When Eric Washington came over from Carolina, he was brought in as a very highly thought of coach to be the Bills defensive line coach. And I think a lot of people thought that if and when Leslie Frazier got a head coaching job or the Bills moved on from Leslie Frazier, that Eric Washington would be a natural replacement for Frazier to be in-house and groomed for that role, much like Ken Dorsey was for Brian Daboll. But what has happened for Eric Washington is we have seen the Bills sink draft capital, first and second round picks into Ed Oliver, Gregory Rousseau, AJ Epinesa, Boogie Basham, sink all kinds of free agent dollars into Von Miller, DaQuan Jones, Star Latulele, Trent Murphy, Vernon Butler. You know the names. And while there's been some hits, there's been a lot of misses, and there's been some concern over the development specifically of guys like Boogie Basham, Ed Oliver, and AJ Epinesa, and that falls square on the shoulders of the defensive line coach, Eric Washington. So my first thought is, I wonder if making Al Holcomb the senior defensive assistant is kind of a way to move Eric Washington aside. I don't expect him to not continue to be the defensive line coach, although I do think it's possible that they look at something like that moving forward. I do wonder if Al Holcomb coming in bumps Eric Washington out of that spot as the heir apparent to Leslie Frazier. It is important to know that Leslie Frazier is 64 years old. And as Matt Perino also pointed out, while you would think he still has the fire to continue to coach because he still is taking interviews to be a head coach. He didn't, I don't believe he got any this offseason, but his name's been hot. He got some last offseason. It feels like it's not like retiring is imminent for him, but I think you could see a scenario where Leslie Frazier, either if the Bills have another season that ends like the last three have, where the defense really lets them down in a playoff game, or if Leslie Frazier just is after next year is like, hey, I'm 65. I don't really want to do this. I've made a lot of money. I've had a lot of success. I want to go enjoy retirement. The Bills have an in-house candidate that I think would now be Al Holcomb instead of Eric Washington. I also think we need to understand that just because they're not getting rid of Leslie Frazier, it doesn't mean that they can't get new eyes in the building. And that's where I think Al Holcomb coming in can be a breath of fresh air. They are not going to shake up the scheme. That's obvious. It's going to still be the Sean McDermott, Leslie Frazier system. Al Holcomb is kind of a student from that, learning a lot under Steve Wilks. He's actually coached with Sean McDermott before in Carolina, but new, fresh eyes, experienced eyes in the room can never be a bad thing. So this isn't the change that a lot of us were necessarily hoping for, particularly when the season ended so abruptly with the heartbreaking loss to the Bengals where the Bills weren't competitive on either side of the ball. But I do think that this Al Holcomb signing as a senior defensive assistant does have some significant upside. And I don't think it's as simple as the Bills only have one book of names and it's the Carolina Panthers book. I think that's oversimplifying it. I understand the frustration, but when you hear about how much respect Al Holcomb has around the league, and I also want to point out Zach Vaughn from Buffalo Fanatics did a great job pointing this out on Twitter. He mentioned that while Al Holcomb has been a defensive coordinator twice in his career, it was both actually under Steve Wilks. So he's never been a defensive coordinator for Sean McDermott. So if we're okay living in the world where Leslie Frazier and Ken Dorsey are both coming back, which I think is the world we are currently living in, so we need to all start to be okay with it, adding experience to the room is not a bad thing. And that's where the Bills are. So I don't think this is cause for concern. I don't think this is cause for chaos. I think what the Bills have done here is really shined a spotlight on Eric Washington. You are no longer the heir apparent to Leslie Frazier. Should he move on or should he be moved on from after this season? It feels like maybe Al Holcomb is that new guy. And who knows, maybe this could lead to somebody like Luke Kuechly joining the staff down the line. We shall see. But this was Built-In Buffalo Quick Hits. I am Josh McCarty, and let me know in the comments what you think of the Al Holcomb signing. Is it a concern for Leslie Frazier? Is it a concern for Eric Washington? Or are you concerned about how the Bills keep tapping in to the Carolina pipeline? Please subscribe to Built-In Buffalo on YouTube, and you will get notifications every time we drop Buffalo Bills off-season content. I will talk to you next time on Built-In Buffalo Quick Hits.